Lenovo's Legion 7 has AMD Ryzen CPU and AMD Radeon graphics, while the Legion 7i has Intel CPU and Nvidia graphics. But which is the best gaming laptop for you? I've compared both to find out all the differences. Both laptops are exactly the same size, but according to Lenovo's spec sheet, the AMD one weighs 0.4 pounds or 200 grams more. And while my AMD one was heavier, it was by a smaller amount and not something I could notice just picking them up. The port layout is the same, but the left side on the Intel-based 7i has two Thunderbolt 4 ports, while the AMD one has a USB 4 Type-C port closer to the back, and the one closer to the front is USB 3.2 Gen 2, so more faster ports for Intel. Let's start out with raw CPU performance. The Legion 7i was scoring 40% higher than the 7 in multi-core. Not too surprising considering the higher core and thread count available to Intel. Intel was also scoring 22% higher in single-core performance compared to AMD, which is quite a big difference for two top-tier machines from the same generation. Things change if we unplug the charger and instead run the tests on battery power. AMD is often, but not always, more efficient compared to Intel here, and this is why the Legion 7 was now scoring higher than the 7i in both single and multi-core performance. Battery life is another area where AMD typically comes out ahead of Intel, and that's the case here too, with the Ryzen-based Legion 7 lasting for 32% longer compared to the Intel-based Legion 7i in my YouTube video playback test. AMD was a bit behind when gaming on battery though. Both gaming laptops have the same screen and a mux switch. The Legion 7 has FreeSync, while the 7i has G-Sync. However, the 7i also has Advanced Optimus, so it can swap between the integrated and discrete graphics without a reboot. This isn't something the AMD-based Legion 7 can do. For whatever reason, it does not have AMD's equivalent of Smart Access graphics. Let's compare some games next. In Red Dead Redemption 2 at 1080p, the AMD-based Legion 7 was reaching a 13% higher average frame rate. It's actually the highest result ever measured in this test so far, as this is a game that tends to prefer Radeon graphics over GeForce. At the higher 1440p resolution, the all AMD Legion 7 is now reaching a 15% higher average FPS compared to the Legion 7i. And again, this was the fastest result ever recorded in this game at this resolution. Not all games prefer AMD though. Control, on the other hand, seems to generally prefer Nvidia, which explains why AMD's best 6850M XT is now sitting in between a number of RTX 3070 Ti laptops, with a much lower 1% low, indicating more dips in performance. The 1% low value rises up a bit at the higher 1440p resolution, but it's still closer to 3070 Ti laptops, with the Intel and Nvidia Legion 7i being 17% faster. Average FPS in Cyberpunk 2077 was much closer together. However, again, the all AMD version had more dips in performance, as shown by the 1% low, so a more consistent experience on the Intel and Nvidia version. The gap between them gets larger at the higher 1440p resolution, with the 3080 Ti now 12% ahead of the 6850M XT in average FPS, compared to just a 4% lead at 1080p. The gap gets much wider if we enable ray tracing. Even with FSR 2.1 set to balanced on both laptops, the Nvidia one was still reaching a 41% higher average frame rate, and with DLSS instead of FSR, it was performing a little better. Of course, this isn't directly comparable, as there will also be visual quality differences between DLSS and FSR. That's another advantage for the Nvidia laptop. It can use DLSS or FSR, while Radeon GPUs are limited to just FSR. So this means that there's a wider selection of games that Nvidia can upscale and get an FPS boost with. And Nvidia also just generally tends to do better at tracing those rays. The screens of both laptops use the exact same panel, so there's no point comparing response time, brightness, or color gamut. Total system latency, on the other hand, measures how long it takes between a mouse click and when a gunshot fire appears on the screen in CSGO. So the whole chain of hardware, including the CPU and GPU, matter. The Legion 7i with Intel plus Nvidia was a little faster, but this'll only really matter if you're playing competitively and need every millisecond. Content creation is an area where AMD's Radeon graphics usually lose to Nvidia, and that's seen here in Blender, where the 6850 RTX XT was only ahead of the 6800S in the Asus Zephyrus G14. Even budget-friendly RTX 3050 Ti laptops were ahead. Adobe Premiere doesn't work too well with Radeon graphics either, as seen here with the Puget Systems benchmark. Even the lower-tier Legion 5 with a Ryzen 7 6800H CPU and RTX 3060 GPU was scoring higher. Intel plus Nvidia was still ahead in DaVinci Resolve with the Legion 7i, but the all-AMD Legion 7 wasn't quite as bad in this one. At the same time though, it's still getting beaten by a slim RTX 3060 option. Adobe Photoshop relies more on CPU performance than GPU, so although the two laptops are closer together now compared to the video editing tests, Intel still has superior single and multi-core performance, as we saw earlier in Cinebench, and this translates to an Intel lead here too. Other workloads like SolidWorks didn't seem to run on the AMD machine, at least with SpecView Perf, while others like Maya seem to prefer the Radeon GPU. The 1TB SSD in the AMD version was faster than the Intel one in most tests, but it's possible that drives may vary by region rather than it being an Intel vs AMD thing. The AMD version was also faster when it came to Wi-Fi speed, which took me by surprise, as MediaTek Wi-Fi usually gets beaten by Intel or killer options. But not today. Fan noise seemed the same, but thermals aren't directly comparable as all chips measure TDP differently, and sensors in the chips are different too. Other things like keyboard, touchpad, design, build quality, speakers, size, screen, and cameras were the same on both laptops. So I won't compare all of that other stuff here, there's no point. If you do want the details, then you can check out my full review on the Legion 7i linked below this one. Let's discuss pricing and availability next. This will change over time, so again, refer to those links below the video for updates. Right now, the maxed out AMD configuration is $2,860 on Lenovo's website for the same specs I've tested here, but with a 2TB SSD instead, as they didn't let me customize that. The Intel and Nvidia version costs more than $500 more, but you could save over $300 with the i7-12800HX CPU instead, which still gets you the same amount of cores and threads. We've actually got an AMD Legion 7 on our Gaming Laptop Deals website. Granted, it's not the maxed out version, but it's also almost $900 less than the one I've tested. We update the deal site with the latest sales on gaming laptops every single day, so check it out at gaminglaptop.deals to save money on your next gaming laptop. Alright, so which Legion 7 should you get? The cheaper all-AMD version, or the more expensive Intel and Nvidia option? All things considered, I think the Intel and Nvidia option is the better machine. Yeah, it costs more, but when you're spending around $3,000 for maxed out hardware like this, I'd argue it's worth spending a few $100s extra to get the best. At least I know that I'd be willing to pay that at that point to get the superior experience. But of course, it does depend on what you're using the machine for. I'm a content creator, so I need that Adobe Premiere performance. But I would consider the AMD version if I did have a workload that would benefit from the Radeon graphics, or if I wanted to maximize battery life or performance on battery, as AMD was definitely more efficient there in most cases. I've also heard that Linux works better with Radeon graphics too, so that could be another reason to pick the AMD model. Otherwise, in most games, and especially content creation, the Intel and Nvidia configuration was generally ahead in more cases than not. Not to mention, it's got Advanced Optimus, so you don't have to reboot like the AMD one, so just a smoother experience for gaming overall. And Nvidia also gets you ray tracing, as well as DLSS and FSR, while the AMD config only gets you FSR. Now, these are the older 2022 models from last year. Find out about this year's Legion Pro 7 and Pro 7i in this video here. It looks like Lenovo has kinda redesigned these laptops, but they might not actually be as good. You'll have to be the judge for yourself after you see that video. It might still be worth picking one of these 2022 models, so I'll see you in that one next.